Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome back to the Power Podcast. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Alison Moore. Now, Ali is an award-winning journalist with more than 30 years in major TV, radio and print media roles. She's also a long-time advocate for gender equity. Post-Me Too movement, her advocacy, support and investigation not just won awards, but changed the way sexual harassment is reported. In 2023, she co-founded Tika, a charity designed to remove the barriers survivors experience when seeking justice and accountability. And her best-selling memoir, No Words for This, was released just last year in April. Ali, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, kia ora. Thanks, Jess, for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm so excited to get stuck into kōrero because I've followed you for years and you've done some really brave, some really amazing things, and you've always been there having the hard conversations for making a better world for the rest of us. And I feel like sometimes having those hard conversations, particularly when you're in the spotlight yourself, must be a hard gig. And yet you've kept doing it for years and you've kept reinventing yourself. Tell me about some of those challenges along the way and what's kept you going even when it's gotten really bloody hard.
Gosh, that's such a big question, but I guess it's best answered. I was quite busy last week in the lead up to International Women's Day with speaking engagements, and at one of them at ISAS Ventures, they gave us the prompt to answer of what is the best advice you've ever been given in your career? And when I think back over 40 years, I've been given a lot of advice, but my response to that was when I started the Me Too NZ project at Stuff, there was a lot of blowback, there was a lot of backlash against the concept. I won't go into all the details, but, you know, it included cartoon published in the paper of me as a witch sitting on a broomstick with gossip written across my long black cape. And at the time, one of my colleagues sat me down because it was rattling, you know, it was uncomfortable and upsetting to be publicly criticised for doing what I thought was a good thing for society. And the colleague sat me down and said simply, Ali, keep going. Keep going. So that's what I've done. I refuse to let people who perhaps haven't broadened their mind enough to really understand what survivors of sexual violence go through and the barriers that remain that block them from feeling comfortable to report what's happened to them. I refuse to let those naysayers stand in my way. So, perhaps I'm a bit stubborn, Jess. Perhaps I'm a bit ornery. And I am at that stage of life where you tend to dig your heels in and say, no, I'm comfortable in what I'm trying to achieve and I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. I think there's some element of what resonates and what's truthful in that around, the older we get, the more comfortable we are in what we stand for and the less shits, I guess, we give about other people that don't see.
That's so true.
Detail in that.
So true. I think a very famous feminist said not so long ago, you get to an age where you open your bag of fucks to give and you look inside and there are none left. If I'm allowed to use that language.
Yeah, that's very much.
That very much describes me, I think.
Yeah, and so much, particularly in our younger years, so much of this conditioning, particularly for women, is around people pleasing and saying yes and not offending and rocking the boat. And yet what you've been able to achieve over the years and those challenges that have come with it has taken so much courage. And I'm intrigued, because there are a lot of women that have this power. Some choose to step into the spotlight and, deal with all the crap that then comes with that. And others choose not to because it's safer. So what do you think courage actually looks like behind the scenes when you're challenging some of those powerful systems? Because you've done it, right?
Well, yes, but I was that people pleaser. And if you've read the book, No Words for This, I can promise you it's not all grim. If you haven't read the book, please buy it if you find it. But it does go into those themes of childhood trauma. And I think that's where, along with societal demands that, especially, in the time that I grew up, I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and there was very much the expectation that you went along pleasantly if you were a girl. Yeah. And combined with childhood trauma, I was that people pleaser for a very, very long time. And sometimes I tried to break out of that. In a career context, I remember one great example when I was asked to step into the shoes of a male presenter that had just been removed from the breakfast program on TVNZ. This was in the early mid-2000s. And I put on my big girl pants and I told the boss that I would do the job, sure, happy to, if they paid me as much as they were paying. Until that day, the male presenter and the boss, the head of news, laughed in my face. Wow. So what were my options? I backed down and I stepped into the job earning half probably of what the male presenter was earning. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is you have those moments where you're fired up enough to really try and assert yourself and push back, and you can still get shut down. Yeah. So it does take commitment. You have to say, this is what I'm going to do. And the way I think about it is that there's so much going on in the world, particularly right now. There's so much to worry about, to be concerned about, and to fight against, that it can be overwhelming. And I think you have to pick one thing that you feel that you can make a difference in. And so I have picked support for survivors of sexual harm. And that's what I'm going to put all of my efforts into. I'm not ignoring that there are many, many other issues, so many that I think what we're seeing at the moment is cause fatigue, which makes you, there's so much to be concerned about that it makes you feel, well, what can I do? So my advice to anybody would be pick one thing and go as hard as you can towards that goal.
Yeah. It's such good advice, because especially the way the world is at the moment, it can feel like there's so many things that need solving and so many things we care about that it's hard, right? There's that fatigue, there's that helplessness of there's so much I want to change, but where do I start? And yeah, really good advice to just focus on one thing where you can make the biggest difference. And you've certainly done that. I think, the Tika project is a really good example of exactly that. Tell us a bit more about how that came about and a bit more about the charity.
So Tika has had quite a long time in the building of the concept. It was born out of a frustration, really, when myself and my co-founder had a cup of coffee. We'd known each other for quite a while. Zoe Lawton is a barrister, and she was one of the other people in Aotearoa New Zealand who did something really concrete at the time of Me Too in 2018, when all that Harvey Weinstein revelation came out from the New York Times, and then a few months later here in New Zealand we had the Russell McVeigh case, and so in our separate lanes, myself in journalism and Zoe in law, we were both really trying to raise awareness and platform survivors' voices, because that was the push at the time, to make sure as many women in New Zealand, mainly women, men also, in New Zealand had the opportunity to have their stories heard if they so wished, just like what was going on internationally. So, we both went hard at that work for 5 years. And when I came out of the Me Too NZ project in 2023 because there simply wasn't, the state of the media was such that there simply isn't the money really for that kind of long-term investigative work, which is very resource heavy, and by resource heavy I mean also legal advice and fees heavy.
Yes.
So we came out of that and we sat down together and over a cup of coffee and had a good long whinge about how, despite the fact that we had spent so long raising awareness, those reporting rates, you know, the number of people out of that 1 million New Zealanders who have experienced sexual harm in their lifetimes, that reporting rate had stayed below 10% for a decade, hadn't budged. So we started looking at what was holding people back, what were the barriers, and conversely, what were the things that we could do, what were the levers to pull to ensure that people felt more comfortable to report what had happened to them and seek accountability and perhaps justice, whatever that looks like to them. Because, of course, accountability and justice looks different for everyone. I, for example, did not ever report my perpetrator along the normal channels. We didn't go to the police. I wrote a book instead. I wrote a #1 bestseller. And that was my way of processing and my form of accountability. So it's really important to remember that every survivor story is different. So what could we build that would do all of those things? And we had the strong feeling that technology, advanced technology and the rise of AI would probably factor in a large way. So what we have built, what we have 3 years later, is a secure tech platform that allows people to report what's happened to them at any time of their life online, completely safely and securely. They get immediate lawyer-client privilege through our Tika legal services. And then our large language model starts to look for connections with other people who have reported the same perpetrator. Right. And it brings together a community or a group of people who have been harmed by the same person. And then that group gets individual legal advice and representation as a group all the way to the end of whatever justice pathway they choose for free.
Wow.
That's the concept. So that and it has two parts. It allows people to report online and report in a way that they're not committing themselves immediately to an official process.
Yeah.
So you can put your information into Tika and you can potentially, if you're matched with others, get legal advice on what your options are, but you don't have to commit at that stage to reporting to police or anything really. You can understand your options and sit with the decision until you feel ready. So that's part of taking away those barriers that currently exist, which of course we kind of all know what the barriers are. They are lack of information about where what happened to you sits within New Zealand law. You know, I know something bad happened to me, but I don't really know whether it was illegal or not. That's a big one. And of course, the usual shame and self-blame, unwarranted shame and self-blame that a lot of survivors feel. Fear of not being believed, that's a big one. And just a, general reluctance to step unsupported into the legal space, which is totally understandable. You know, there's very few of us that have ever worked with a lawyer. Nobody really knows what it's like. But I can tell you that all of the international research over the past few years, there was, in particular, I'm thinking of a big piece of research that was done by the Australian Law Commission last year showed that the one thing that would convince survivors of sexual harm to report is independent legal advice. So
nice.
that's what Tika provides. A safe way to report and support when you have reported.
Yeah, it's amazing, Mahi Ali, to be bringing into the world, and I think, you know, when you think about yourself and other survivors that are, you know, our age, if we'd had the Me Too movement, if we'd got projects like Tika, do you think things would have been different for you in terms of reporting? When you kind of look at where we're at now, would that have made things different for you back then in terms of your willingness to report or being able to?
Potentially, I think that had things been different, I may have taken a different path. And remembering that I didn't breathe a word of what had happened to me for 40 years. The average time the average time frame that survivors take to report is 16 years. That's the average. So you can see we're talking about long periods here. And for me, it was 40 years. So what changed that? And this is an important element of Tika as well. What changed that was the second I found out, the instant I found out that that I had community, that there were others who'd gone through the same thing as I had. In my case, it was my sister and my nephew. And that changed everything for me. It was like uncorking a bottle, Jess. Yeah. I went from not even being able to allow the thought of what happened to me to enter my mind to being able to speak freely about it. Now, it won't be, you know, I'm a professional communicator, so it won't be the same for everybody, but I think the idea that there is somebody there or a mechanism there to support you all the way along that process would have potentially made a huge difference. And there will be tons of people around my age who, in fact, I know there are, because I've had in excess of 500 personal messages on various platforms since I released the book, saying, gosh, this sounds so familiar to me, Ali. You know, the same thing happened to me.
Yeah, and potentially I haven't breathed the word of it either. And I see it in your book, and now it gives me the courage to go, right, you've done this, I can do this. And now there are also platforms and ways of me doing this that aren't as daunting as perhaps even if I have considered doing it before, and they're not.
Yes, absolutely. That's you've got it in one.
Yeah. And I mean, you've led out, I mean, this is just the latest in a long line of projects that are changing the world in this space. And you've led out so many of them over the years. What have you leaned on in terms of your own leadership skills and how that's changed over the years to kind of keep doing this groundbreaking Mahi and bringing this stuff into the world when you reflect on your own leadership journey?
I'm not sure that I've ever seen myself as a leader, perhaps until quite recently.
Yeah.
I was forced, you know, when the very concept of the Me Too NZ project that I started at Stuff in 2018 kind of forced me into that role. And I'm not sure that I was that good at it as a, you know, leader of people. I think probably I'm better as a leader of concepts. I think stickability is probably my best attribute. You know, the lack of willingness to be stopped even under pressure. And I don't just, you know, I want to emphasize that I like to work on things that I know will work and are the right thing to do. I don't just run off willy-nilly and throw my efforts into half-baked concepts. There has been a lot of work that has gone into developing Tika, for example, both in the legal space with Zoe's work and in the survivor-focused and messaging space from my work. So I make sure that I've convinced myself personally that what I'm doing is the right thing and will work. So, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that now.
Oh, 100%. And I think that links back to your advice earlier about one thing. You've obviously picked one thing and you've picked it in a way that it totally aligns to your passions and what you believe in, your lived experience, the difference you want to make in the world. And I think all of that stuff makes it worth the effort then, because it is a lot of effort. And I think unless those things are true, it can be something that drains our energy and the effort can run out. And clearly that hasn't been the case with you. Probably also that stickability that you believe in that space.
I mean, it's not all upside. I think that kind of commitment can increase risk in some areas. And that is, I mean, this is not going to happen, but if it failed, then the risk to my commitment to achieving real change in this area is exponentially increased. So it is, when you put your heart and soul into something like this, I think you do want to know it's going to work.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I mean, there's been massive challenges. It's very difficult to fundraise in this space, for example. There was some research that was released by the wonderful Lani Evans at FundSorter last November, which showed that of all the contestable funding in New Zealand, less than 1% is targeted to domestic and sexual violence projects. Less than 1% of all contestable funding. So it is incredibly difficult to find the money to bring a new project to life. But I've not had, neither has my co-founder Zoe, had a single person in 3 years say this is a bad idea. I don't think there's been a single person that's told us that. So that's helpful.
Hardly surprising, right? Because it isn't a bad idea. I mean, when you've faced in the past those challenges and particularly, the backlashes that you talked about, how have you been able to protect your confidence to pick it up and carry on regardless?
Okay, well, currently, if I have a crisis of confidence, I, particularly as we get ready to launch, because we know that there will be a backlash, I find the space that we're sitting in internationally right now with the maelstrom around the release or otherwise of the Epstein files is really interesting because almost 8 years on from Me Too, I look back at all that criticism and the backlash that has come through in those years that said, Me Too went too far, and and targeted the wrong people and did too much, and it was too much. We hear that a lot. I think with all the Epstein stuff, we can clearly see that it didn't go far enough, right?
Yeah.
So I take a bit of comfort from that because sometimes you have to wait a little while to be vindicated.
Yeah.
And I just know that there's so much more we can do. I mean, the thing I'm excited about now, and the reason I remain so committed, is that we've come up with a concept that is truly innovative. And I don't think, in fact, one of the panelists at the International Women's Day event at Parliament last week said this on stage. Tika is the first truly innovative project to come through in this space for years. The use of AI, and I want to make very clear to your listeners, because there's a lot of chat around AI and its drawbacks at the moment, that when we say AI in relation to Tika, we are talking about a closed platform. We're not talking about ChatGPT. We're not talking about generative AI in any form. Tika only learns from the information that is put into it by survivors with their full permission. So it is AI, but not in the way everybody talks about it at present.
Used for good and with some guardrails in place.
Yeah, AI for good.
Which is just how we like it. One of the things I've always admired about you, Ali, is how you've been able to use your voice to advocate and to go to some difficult, challenging places as well for the betterment of many that don't have a voice, right, or can't have their voice heard. What patterns do you see that's holding women back, I guess, from using their voice fully? Because like you suggest, we're at a space in time at the moment where sometimes it feels like we're taking backward steps in this space rather than forward steps. And I'd love us to be in a world where more women felt that they could use their voice, but I know that it's something that often I'm seeing women holding back from. And I guess, what are you seeing in that space? And what would your advice be to enable women to step into that space where they can use their voice fully?
Well, for this issue, I can tell you that my own experience, and I've seen this time and time again. For example, one of our major donors recently decided to tell her story. She put up a post on LinkedIn and spoke very bravely about her childhood experiences with sexual harm, and that can be a very nerve-wracking thing to do. I mean, I was terrified in the days and weeks before the book was released. I don't know what I was terrified of, but I think that you have often by design this feeling that you mustn't tell anybody, you mustn't admit what's, and I put that inverted commas, what's happened to you, because somehow it's your shame to carry. And I can tell you that, and I said this in the book, that I wish I'd known earlier that shame does not survive the sunlight. My any shame I had, unwarranted shame about what happened to me as a child, was completely dissipated the moment I started talking about it. But I don't expect everybody to just charge forward. It can, there's a reason people feel silent, feel they have to stay silent. Often it's because the perpetrator has convinced them to stay silent or threatened them. Or they worry about the reaction from their very close friends and whānau. Will this cause a rift in my family? I was really lucky that my family swung 100% in behind me to the point where they let me release this book, And I got their permission, they read every word before I committed it to publication, so, which was important. Their sign-off was very important. But it doesn't always go that way, Some, particularly whānau situations, are more difficult, and speaking up can feel very, very scary. I'm not assuming that because it worked for me, it's going to work for everyone. But for those who, particularly those who I helped tell their stories in print, when I was working at Stuff, all of those people came to me and asked me to put their, very personal, sometimes the worst thing that had ever happened to them in their lives, on the front page of the newspaper, which is an extraordinary thing to ask for. And every single time I think I ask them, why are you doing this? Why do you want me to do this? Why do you want me to tell your story? And almost everybody said, I don't want this to happen to anybody else.
Yeah.
There is a really strong sense of wanting to help keep the community safe. And I really admire survivors for that. And that is one of the things that they will get immediately if they register with Tika, because you may put your details into Tika, which include the name of the perpetrator that harmed you, and you might decide not to do a single thing more. You might just let it go into the system and leave it there. But you will know that you have done something potentially to keep other people safe from that person. And I think that in itself will be helpful to kind of lift the burden off a survivor's shoulders a little bit. If they know that they've done their best, they don't feel that they can report to police or other authorities, but they've done the next best thing to help keep the community safe. Yeah.
Yeah. And often we are motivated, particularly women, we are motivated by helping others rather than the motivation of, how do I get justice for myself? And often that's the lever that ends up pushing us into that space. But, as
a lot of people tell me it's too late for me, Ali, but I really don't want this to happen to anybody else. So it's a strong motivator.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes such bravery and courage. And thank you for your bravery and courage and persistence and all of the stories that you've been able to share, and the bravery and courage of those that have willingly shared those stories. I love your quote, shame does not survive the sunlight. And I think that's something that for those of us listening to take away. But tell us some more about, obviously the book is amazing. I've read it, so go out there and get it. If you've not already read it, how do we find out more about what you're up to and Tika? How do we get involved and support the project? When is it officially launching and out there? What do we need to know?
Right. Let me tell you. Well, we are about to launch with what my technical people call a closed public beta launch, which means the platform will be opened by invitation. And that's just so that by the time we go nationwide, we're very comfortable with how the system is working. Because, of course, this needs to be one of the most secure platforms in the country, right? We cannot have a situation like Manage My Health where, which you will have heard about over summer, where we have any kind of lack of top-level security. So that's really important because we're dealing with people's very, very sensitive information. And so we've designed the platform to be completely secure right from the moment we started building it. So it will open soon. In the meantime, what people can do is obviously we're just about to overhaul our website. That's going live in the new version in the next few days. And people can pop on to tika.org.nz and sign up for our newsletter. The most important thing, just harking back to those statistics I mentioned before about the lack of funding in this space, the lack of funding for projects that support survivors of sexual harm. We are going to have to rely on the public largely to get this thing up on its feet. So we have a Give a Little page. I beg you, whoever's listening, even if you can only spare a few dollars, please go to the Give a Little page. If you've got anyone in your life, whether it's you, your sister, your brother, a whānau member, a friend, a colleague who has experienced any kind of assault or harassment or online harm in their lives and might need this, please give if you can.
Yeah.
So
every little helps as well.
Yeah. 100%. If I could get $1 for every survivor that there is, survivor of sexual harm in New Zealand, that's 1 million people, then I would be a lot further ahead in getting this up and strongly working than I am right now. So please give if you can at Give a Little, and just search Tika, Tika. Oh, can I tell you, Jess, why we chose that name? Because I think it's really important.
Please do.
Yeah, so when we were looking for a name for a project like this, Tika was one that we loved straight away. But we certainly weren't going to just pick that up and run away with it, because to us, the name Tika is the taonga. And so we went to Te Tōra Whiri Te Reo Māori, the Māori Language Commission, and asked the question as to whether this was right for this mahi, did it fit the kaupapa? And that was not a short consultation. It took some time, but they came back to us and they said, yes, in this context, tika means justice or putting things right, which I thought was a beautiful way of putting it, and that they strongly supported us using it. So that was
nice.
That was it for us.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to put that out there because it is one of those words that people in today that people feel strongly about. So it's important to me that that people know that we went about this in a careful, considered way. So go to the website. Please give a little if you can, and you will see us begin to enter the public space. We have a launch flow that will be beginning to push out quite soon. And you can follow us on socials. We're Tika NZ on Instagram, and the same on TikTok, I think. I've had to become a TikTok native. That's been interesting at my age.
All part of the learning journey.
And, you can send me a message request on LinkedIn. I have a lovely flow of people everywhere I go who then send me a direct message after they've met me and say, "Ooh, I've got this skill and this skill. Could that be helpful to you?" And in almost every case, it definitely is. So if you like the sound of this project, this initiative, just please get in touch. We rely on generally on funding from individual philanthropy. So, and we are always open to meet personally with people who would like to get involved in any way. So, yeah.
Fabulous.
That was a very long answer to your short question.
I would definitely 100% all that, and get in touch. Go to the website first of all. Give if you can. Get in touch with Ali if there's ways that you can help. I can't wait to see this come out into the world and start to be used, and it's going to have a huge impact it's almost like the Me Too movement again, and I think that's probably what the world is calling for, because as you said, we've not gone far enough, clearly. And so thank you for all your mahi in this space, and looking forward to seeing it coming into the world. And thank you for sharing today as well how we can support and get involved. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, Ali. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jess. I'm really, really I was thrilled when you asked me. So, and it's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Awesome. And we'll put the links in the show notes as well to make it easy for everybody to access the links that you've talked about and find out more about your mahi, and obviously Tika as well.
Lovely.